Bill Matteson's parents were 33 and 31 when they were formally introduced on a ship going from Los Angeles to Honolulu, where they were married 2 weeks later at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. She grew up in a small town in Tennessee and graduated from Vanderbilt in 1914. She taught English and Latin and loved to play the piano. This is her playing in the background. Bill's father was born in Chicago, where his father had been serving as a Northern Baptist minister. Bill's father graduated from Colgate and became a maritime attorney working out of New York City with his office on Wall Street. His maritime practice took him all over the world and instilled in Bill a desire to learn about the world. In the late 30s, he traveled often to South America and England, where he did a lot of business with Lloyd's Insurance Company. Bill remembered his dad saying that South America had a great future and that he should follow its development closely and learn Spanish. Bill was the youngest of 3 children who were raised in Mount Vernon, New York. Bill's childhood was filled with wonderful family activities. If you notice, even when he's riding his bike, though, he's got his tie on, or he's playing with his train set, he's got his suit and tie on. He was always dressed nicely, always had his hair combed, and he never ever swore. Bill's mother and father taught him how to play golf at an early age at Echo Lake in the Pocono Mountains, where they spent their summers. Photography was an important hobby to Bill's father. He had his own dark room and he did his own film editing. As you can see here, here's a travel log that he put together of a family visit to Echo Lake, driving there, and as well as when the kids arrived, this is Bill's brother diving into Echo Lake and Bill himself swimming in the lake. In the mid-30s, Bill and his family played a game with Charles Darrow and his family, who had a home in Echo Lake. That game became Monopoly when it was sold to Parker Brothers in 1936. Bill's dad recorded them playing at the beach, playing in the band, and playing tennis to attract girls like Ruthie Bailey, Janice Wharton. Bill played guard and football at Petty boarding school. He also played golf in the springtime and swam in the winter. He swam the 100-yard free, breaking a minute, and was on the golf team and scored in the 70s. Bill had plenty of friends at Petty, including his roommate, Bert Laird. He was also inspired and motivated by a great teacher named Don Rich, who pushed hard for Bill to consider Yale. Bill's first semester at Yale found him falling in his dorm, cutting his knee very badly, followed by pulmonary thrombosis as a result of a blood clot that he had. And then he ended up having an appendectomy, all in his first semester at Yale. He missed approximately 6 weeks of that semester. Through determination and using hard, focused efforts, Bill was able to graduate with his class. After completing his sophomore year at Yale, Bill spent 2 weeks on Nantucket visiting his friend Herbie Morash. The following is an excerpt from his book, Reflections, that talks about that visit with Herbie and getting to know Marilee. All went smoothly until I got off the boat to Nantucket late in August, where I was met by Herbie and taken to a party at the Wade Cottages in Sconset on the eastern shore of Nantucket Island. There I ran into again none other than Marilee. From then on, all was lost. We were 18 and 16, and we were married 3 years later at 21 and 19 in Bethel, Connecticut at her parents' house. Where did those 3 years go and how did it all happen is a story itself. But after our first 2 weeks in Nantucket, the writing was on the wall. After a short honeymoon, Bill and Marilee headed to Cambridge and Harvard, where Bill earned the rank of 23rd in his class the first year and a position on the Harvard Law Review. Bill's father was somewhat disappointed when Bill didn't join him at his law firm in New York City. But he also understood that Bill was his own man, and Bill decided to join a different law firm, one called Debevoise and Plimpton today. At the time, it only had approximately 20 lawyers. Before starting at Debevoise, Bill was offered the position of clerk for Judge Augustus Hand in the Federal Court of Appeals in the Second Circuit in New York City. Gus, as he was called, was a prestigious judge in the most important federal appeals court and was a cousin to Judge Learned Hand, who was even more famous in the same court and located across the hall from Gus. Quoting Bill, "Learned had brilliance, passion, and force, and Gus was steady, practical, and patient, always looking for the best solution to a problem. They did share one thing in common, and that was a desire to decide a case without prejudice, to give dignity to the court, and to give justice to the litigants." Gus retired that year, and as a result, Bill had the great honor of being his last clerk. The next year, the dean of the Harvard Law School again approached Bill and asked him if he wanted to clerk again, this time for Supreme Court Justice Harold Burton, and Bill readily agreed. One of the biggest cases that year for Bill was adopting the decree of the court necessary to implement the Brown versus Board of Education decision the previous year, calling for the end of racial segregation. The justices and the clerks all understood the historical significance of this decree. All 9 justices pulled together to agree and present a decree that set the tone over these many years of implementation of our new desegregation policy. In the fall of 1955, Bill began his law practice at Debevoise and Plimpton. His first assignment was to assist Whitney Debevoise in the representation of the Ford Foundation in the disposition of Ford Motor Company stock, 93% of which was then owned by the foundation. Dispositions of Ford stock kept him busy, mixed with various assignments with other clients, including Scudder, Stevens & Clark, Consolidation Coal Company and its affiliate Hanna Mining in Cleveland, and Pocahontas Coal and Coke in West Virginia. In the late 50s, he got involved with the recapitalization of KLM, then owned 100% by the Dutch government. After 5 years of hard work, Bill became partner, at last allowing him more time for his family and social life. They settled in Peter Cooper Village in Manhattan and began renting a house in Nantucket in the summertime. He was able to spend more time with his kids, teaching them things like sailing, just like his father had taught him. The family began going regularly to Nantucket for 6 weeks in the summertime. In 1969, they bought a home on a bluff in Nantucket near the Sankaty Lighthouse. That house had to be moved over the years twice because of bluff erosion. Recently, efforts have been put in place to try to save the bluff. In New York, they lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment at 1192 Park Avenue. In 1971, Bill was nominated to become head of the SEC. However, Bill Casey was able to use his political influence and eliminate Bill from the running. After that, Bill never let his name be put in for political office again. In the early 70s, Bill took over the Paris office. Some of the partners agreed with him that it might be useful to explore moving further into an international practice, which would allow them to compete better with some of their major law firm competitors in New York City. Bill remembered the lessons he learned from his father about companies being international in scope. Over the years, he was largely responsible for opening offices in London, Budapest, Moscow, LA, and Shanghai. In Paris, Bill began his lasting friendship with wine and Stephen Spurrier, who was depicted by Alan Rickman in the movie Bottle Shop. He became a wine expert and in Burgundy became a Chevalier du Tastavant. They developed a love for the south of France, particularly Nice and Caen, and for skiing in Courchevel in France, as well as Zermatt and Klosters in Switzerland. Bill returned from France and encountered one of his biggest accounts in 1980 when he took over the Chrysler account for their company. He was representing the $2 billion bailout that the United States had proposed, and Chrysler ended up borrowing $500 million. Bill said it was scary to take on this job because there was no other precedent for it. The government financing of private industry was a first. On the afternoon before the proposed closing of the sale of the bonds and the government guarantee, they had a meeting of all the lawyers involved in Bill's offices on the 33rd floor of 250 Park Avenue in New York. Everything was going smoothly until a fire broke out on the 30th floor, requiring everyone to vacate the building by walking down 30 flights of stairs. This deal had been delayed many times already, and Chrysler's investment bankers were worried that a further delay would risk the financing. Over 400 banks had signed contracts which now reposed in their offices, which had to be found and moved if a closing was to be held. No one was being allowed back in the building as smoke poured from the 30th floor, and the underwriters were panicking. Bill decided to take action. He put up his collar, pulled down his hat, walked across the street, and acted like he was an official of some kind. He walked into the building, found the owner of the building, who was surrounded by firefighters, newspaper reporters, but Bill was able to get his attention. Bill must have made a heck of a sales job to the owner of the building because he allowed Bill with a small group of attorneys back into the building at 11 p.m. They rode the freight elevator to the 33rd floor, gathered up the Chrysler documentation, putting them into carts, and back out of the building. Those carts were then rolled down the street, down Park Avenue, to another office where they were at 10 a.m. the next morning signed. Chrysler was then able to produce the K car, which was a lighter weight American-made vehicle with a four-cylinder engine that got better gas mileage. Initial sales of the K car were so strong that Chrysler was able to pay back the loan in just 3 years rather than the 10 that was on the original note. Lee Iacocca said, "We at Chrysler borrow money the old-fashioned way. We pay it back." This began a great relationship with Chrysler, which lasted until the company was sold to Fiat. Please tune in to the next episode in the Bill Matteson story. It's on YouTube at Bill Matteson HM1.